This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome, everyone. Today, this is the Kubernetes 1.25 release retrospective. This is the first release retrospective that's conducted mid-cycle of the 125 release. We will have a part 2, our second retrospective, and if needed, a third retrospective after the 125 release has been cut, which is targeting the date of August 23rd. I'm your host today. My name is Ray Lajano. I'm the current Emeritus Advisor for the 125 release team. Do want to make a note that please be aware that this is a Kubernetes community which falls under the CNCF Code of Conduct, which can be summarized to be excellent and kind to each other. Thank you very much. And this meeting is also recorded and will be publicly posted to YouTube. So please be mindful what you say is being recorded. In the chat here, CC has previously added the link to the release retrospective, and I'll do it one more time here. Keep track of the participants here and my other window. And all right, so we have a few minutes. Here's 10:04, so why don't we start? How this meeting works is that we have multiple sections of some action items from the previous retrospective that we're going to follow up with what went well in the 125 cycle, what have gone better, and what we will do differently in future releases as well. The goal of the retrospective is to be solution oriented, so there's no blaming, there's no finger pointing, and just to be respectful as well. We're gonna with respect to time, we'll try to time box some items as well, but looks like we don't have a since this is the first release retro, things we certainly get more items towards after the release is cut. Please also mute yourself when not speaking. I may not see any hands raised virtually, but so please speak up if you can, if I don't see your hand raised. All right, I think that might be anything else. And also feel free to private message me if there's any concerns that you might have during this meeting. Please feel free to private message me on the Kubernetes Slack at Ray Lajano if you have any questions or concerns or comments. So the first section, there's, like I mentioned, there is four sections we'll go through. First is the previous retro follow-up. We'll follow up with some action items. The first 10 minutes or so, then we'll go over what went well at 125, what could have gone better in 125, and what we will do differently in 120, in 126, and beyond as well. And we'll also create a list of action items that we might have out of this retrospective. And if we could course correct during the release cycle, we should definitely try to do that. All right, first topic on the previous retro, which was the 124 retro, to follow up on is the automate enhancements tracking and identify workflow. So we have enhancement spreadsheets. So this is pretty much solely like one of big thing that's always a headache is the enhancement spreadsheet. So this is one of the replacement for that. So I remember that Priyanka is unable to join, but I think Priyanka asked CC to provide an updates on this.
Yes. So currently, thanks for Priyanka, we have like the script ready for generate the to generate the GitHub project beta board, and we have a board ready up and running, and all the enhancement team, including Shadows, have the access to edit the board. But we're still working on getting the board automatically run periodically in a cron job, which require a GitHub token. So we are asking for permissions to use an existing token that's in progress. But the scripts can be run manually offline now. Yeah, so it's not a blocking.
All right, thank you very much. There's links also on here to the for the tracking issue and to the board itself. And there's an open PR for the automation for that. So I'm not going to go into great detail. Since I know this is a work in progress, one of the, excuse me, this topic was also brought up in the enhancement subproject meeting under SIG-ARC. One of the questions that I have, or that came out of the meeting as well, is when are we able to do the switch or to do a parallel dry run of the switch, the enhancements tracking. So one of my suggestions is to maybe for 126, once the scripts are generated to automate the project board, is to run them in parallel because it takes time for change as well. We do need to communicate this with the community that we are moving from the enhancements tracking sheet to the GitHub's projects board, but we will do a dry run. Then we'll take the lessons learned from that dry run and then possibly do a formal switch in a future release after 126. So those are my suggestions. Yeah, I'm just gonna open up for any comments or questions.
I have a quick question. I think when talking to Priyanka, she said the current way that they're scraping this is via the 1.25 milestone tag. But I think with discussion with the Enhancements Hub project, there is recommendations to look for other methods to scrape, but I can't kind of comes up with idea what other way to scrape besides looking at the milestone tag. So I'm just curious if anyone has context around what that discussion was and why do we need to look for other way?
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, Stephen. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I mean, you have probably more appropriate context, so I'll fill in more details after you speak. Yeah,
so the context around that is because there are many folks who have many contributors who have the milestone or have the permissions to apply the milestone tag. And so and we've seen it before where contributors add the milestone labeled and tagged to like code PRs, and they might get through through a code freeze. And so what was suggested in the meeting was to add a new label that we could track, or maybe a combination of labels with the milestone tag and another label.
Can label be restricted to SIG leads?
So what Ray said, I think what I was going to comment immediately is we need to find a way to lock down this board so it is restricted to only people within the team moving this stuff about. Part of the reason that the enhancements tracking spreadsheet exists in the first place is because at the times we felt that the tools provided by GitHub were not sufficient to ensure that just the team had access to move things through. So we need to ensure that the board is locked, the automation is locked, and it's a combination of tags. There are just the same way the milestone tag is restricted to milestone maintainers. We can use the same kind of logic to do a separate label, but it needs to be a release team reviewed or something, some such label that says like, yes, you're both milestone and release team reviewed, and it's in tree and the scope properly, yada yada yada. Right?
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
So I guess those are the to-do list before we go to 1.26, right? Because if we plan to use the boards at the beginning of 1.26 for even collecting enhancements, we need to get those all addressed by then. But I guess currently we can still use the milestone label as of now, if like another label haven't been created or the decision haven't been made. Is that understanding?
Yeah,
right?
I would +1 the running both systems in parallel, because that also gives you an opportunity to work out the kinks even if 126 has already started.
And I always believe that it takes a while to get communication across, no matter how many times you've sent it via the email, Slack messages. Since this is a process change, we that running in parallel, doing a dry run in parallel, will helps with that process change.
So for context, the reason that we've had this sheet for so long is that change is hard for folks, and even when we communicate these process changes with enough time, there will be someone who misses it. There will be someone who is unhappy about it. There will be a group of folks who call for reverts. it needs to be highly communicated, and we need to run the existing system for a while in place. Even the opt-in process was supposed to like give way to the receipts process, right? And we can see that that never happened because people were that vehemently against how it was shaped. So I'm excited to see this. I would also say be careful. Make sure we're biasing towards over communication in all of this.
Exactly. I would definitely lean to over communicate.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on to next topic. This is for the 124 bug triage team and 125 bug triage team, GOT Arch, and the bug triage team. This is a process change added to the bug triage handbook. So when master blocking jobs fail, posted to the public channel and DM the leads to confirm seeing the message. Is anyone? Let me go see. I don't think they're on. Let me go. Is anyone from bug triage, or is Jyoti and Arch? Are they on the call? I did look through the Git history. I did not see any changes to the bug triage handbook because I'd listed it as to do. So I'll follow up with GOT and Arch to make those changes to the handbook. All right, next one's me. In the shadow application, ask which email for the applicants to use for Google Docs and emails. So I apologize, I did not see this in the past retro, but this is for me, so I'm going to add it to the next shadow application. We do ask for the email, but we should also clarify that this email that we're asking for is to be used for Google Docs and email. So we'll add that to the 126 shadow application.
I'll also clarify that it would be for calendar invites too, because that will make a difference. I personally use two separate addresses. One is specifically for permissioning, and one is to make sure I actually get invites to things. And I'm not certain that we want to open up the opportunity for everyone to have multiple addresses, but I can also appreciate that there is an exclusiveness in requesting that the person's email address work with Google Workspace. So we should chat about it because there's a line to balance on.
All right, so let me just take a little notes. Okay, thank you very much, Stephen. I'll reach out later. Next topic is for Leo. It's about the shadow application analysis tool. I have links to the repo. Some of the action items from when the 124 repo was creating a tracking issue and also working with the SIG-Contrib-X to design a template for the report. So I'm going to hand it off to Leo for an update.
Yes, so this is mostly done. So there's a tracking issue we created, or I created a lot of smaller issues, I think a couple of them, 6 or so, just describing basically a couple of features that we want to implement this cycle, or I'm mainly working on this. The work has been done basically at the end of last cycle, and now I was a bit busy, but I have next week a bit more time to work on this and close this hopefully completely, so that we have for the next cycle a working tool. The documentation, or like how the project should be used and everything, has been already updated, so I think this should be fine. This is basically the few points listed there are done, but the entire project is still work in progress, kind of, because it's not that user friendly right now, because you have to adjust something in the code to work with, because every cycle we have a new application form. So for the shadows, it would be nice to dynamically create like some configuration file, for example, and then don't make changes in the code. And right now this is needed. This is something which is tracked over issues, and yeah.
All right. Any comments or questions for Leo? So I know I won, but I know we haven't really published any reports yet. But what do we expect out of the 126 or after 126?
Yeah, so the tool has basically two use cases. The first use case is for the team leads. So the team lead basically gets an export or some markdown file, which you can just better read. So it's just to highlight or to list all the applicants. So it's a lot easier to go through the markdown file and to the Excel file, and the other one is the report that we want to publish. And the report basically is a bunch of diagrams, a bunch of charts, which we discussed and clarified also with the code of conduct committee and so on. If like the application form in the diagrams are fine to publish, so it's anonymized, there's no information leaked that can be identified, like who is the applicant and so on. So it's just the idea of basically giving a kind of status update in what the shape, like what the team is currently in. So what is the shape currently? Do we have, I don't know, we have like some goals to meet some standards, I don't know, we want to integrate more from some specific region. So this tool should give like an update over time to see if we reach those goals without compromising any privacy concerns or something like this.
Thank you.
So
I know, yeah, with the releasing, we always try to have a very diverse release team, diversity in geo, in time zone, in organizations, and people. And I think this tool will help point out where the gaps are and where we could improve, and how we progress throughout the release cycles.
Yeah, that's the goal.
All right. Any comments or questions for Leo?
Just the one question regarding of the timeline. So we plan to start to using it after 1.26, or is that the expected timeline?
Probably. So we already use the markdown files for the team leads this cycle, because it's also not as big of a problem because it's only used internally, so it doesn't require like a bigger process. But publishing the reports probably will be something for 1.26, I hope. Yeah, first a couple of issues need to be closed, and then I think there's need to create maybe a separate meeting with, I don't know, some folks from the COC or so to discuss if this kind of report can be published. There's already a draft how the report should look like, but it's not getting generated automatically and so on. So there's a bit of work needed, and then depending how this goes, hopefully for 1.26.
Cool, that sounds great. Thank you.
All right, the next three are yours, Leo. So next one's automate. All right, any last minute questions or comments about this topic? All right, next one is automate weekly CI signal reports.
Yeah, so the reports are not automized right now. We already created a repository for creating a cluster for a new dashboard for CI Signal. And in the Kubernetes cluster, we would also have later on then just a cron job running to automatically push the report. But this is not done yet. I think Rob is not on the call. He also made some updates to basically create the report as a pro job. So I have to follow up with him if this is still the idea or not. Yeah. we made some like changes to the CI signal report, how it's basically getting generated. And I think there's also another action item from down, like in what could be improved in 1.26 regarding the CI signal report. So there's in the handbook a template how the report should look like, but it's not automized. There's no automation. It's getting generated manually right now.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for Leo on this? The automating weekly CI signal reports. All right, next topic is CI Signal Onboarding, which is done. It's about adding a new one page to the handbook and recording additional onboarding video clips. Yeah. And there's some links out here. So that's done. I'm going to go on to the next one, which is the CI Signal to use SIPI new monitoring tool to possibly test it out as the pilots. It's an update from Leo.
Yeah. So this is basically like an action item for the current CI Signal team. They are aware of this tool, and maybe I will poke them again, or just basically keep in sync if they are still aware of this tool. But the plan was for this cycle to test out this tool, which is running, and if this is like something that we can also use in the future, if we host it on our side. So this is in progress. It's being investigated.
All right. Thank you. I'll follow up for the next release retro after the 125 cuts. Any comments or questions for Leo on CI Signal using SIPI? All right. Next action item from last retro is from James, who cannot make it. Is to update the lead handbook on for a section on what happens if the release is delayed. This is still needs to be done. So I'll follow up with James after this. Next topic is canceling. Can we cancel frequent? Oh, go ahead.
Can we just go back? What does happen if the release is delayed? I'm curious.
Well, that I need to follow up with James. I believe it needs to communication, of course, needs to be made to the proper channels. Bringing this up to, of course, this is discussed with among SIG release engineering, communication to this possibly to the CNCF, KDev, other mailing lists, leads. Then I will have to follow with James. Since,
no, all good. I just wanted to see. I just wanted to see what everyone's perception of it was. And I'll say it plainly for folks. Any deadlines that we set are aspirational. We try our best to hit our deadlines. But this is open source. This is life. Things happen. I want to impress that y'all should never feel. I can't tell you to never feel stress. That's not realistic. But around deadlines, as long as you're communicating, as long as you're communicating delays in the process, and we're working out plans throughout, the release gets out when it's ready. It is more important to ship a high quality release than to make the target date. So always keep that in mind if you're ever freaking out about missing a deadline. It's okay to miss deadlines as long as we're communicating how and what the impact is going to be and how we're going to recover from it.
I agree. All right.
Yes, I agree.
I'm going to add some of those notes to the lead handbook as well. Thank you. All right, CC, sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I agree on deliver a high quality release than making the deadline. And I guess the stress not only for missing the deadline, but also kind of delaying the following releases, or people inside the release team have previous schedule, or if we communicated enough across all the participants, something like that, I guess. So.
And yeah, and I just wanted to say it so that it was on a recording somewhere. I say it occasionally, but maybe not enough. And to Veronica's note, even when even when proper communication channels are used, there are complaints. We are never going to drive complaints down to zero. That is not the intention. We're going to do our best every time. And communicate using the proper channels. If people have missed those communications or did not get to react in time, that's a different conversation. But as long as we're doing what we've agreed to do as a release team and as SIG release, keep trucking.
All right. Thank you very much. Any additional comments or questions? All right, next topic. I didn't see a specific person or people for this action item. It's just more of a question is, do we cancel frequent burn down meetings if they're not needed? And this is important for the 125 cycle, which we could change as the daily burn downs are going to start shortly.
I guess the topic was raised because last cycle we kind of postponed the release date by a couple weeks, and if like because we are only waiting for a certain items to be completed, and nothing not much new updates was kind of reported during the daily burn down meetings. So that's why people raised the question on if we could reduce the meetings. I guess that's just under a special kind of before the current 1.25, I guess maintaining the daily burn down meetings. If we didn't feel the release date, then the last, especially for the last 2 or 3 weeks of the release cycle, it's sometimes required for meeting or updates more frequently than in the earlier of the release cycle. So I'm not sure if.
So in my opinion, having gone through a number of release teams, that there is a lot that is done in the last 3 to 4 weeks of a release cycle. And this is where lots of teams actually really start going, like docs and comms. In the release notes have cut release notes, but there's beta and RC cuts releases as well. And for me, daily burn downs helped, but I could see it to a point if there was a delay and there's not much more to update, everything is already done, then we could do things in async and Slack. But not just from my personal experience.
Yeah.
Sorry, Cesar.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Stephen.
No, go for it.
I would say, I'm okay with the daily burn down meeting in the last 2 or 3 weeks, but I'm also okay with people if they feel their team doesn't have much to be updated, then feel free to skip some of the meetings and give updates on Slack or just update on the meeting notes. That's also be fine.
Yeah, I agree. I find the daily burn down super helpful as the end of the release cycle does get kind of hectic for comms, but sometimes comms just flat out doesn't have an update beyond, yes, this person finally gave us their blog content. So if there's just some kind of established culture around it's okay for a team to not show up for a daily burn down meeting in the actual Zoom, but they give their meeting notes if there's not much of an update, then I think this is fine. But I do prefer to have the actual Zoom meetings versus being fully asynchronous for a normal release where there is no delay.
Yeah, so my opinion here would be destroy unnecessary meetings wherever possible. We're in too many meetings in general, but the goal of the burn downs is to burn down the log of things that are left to be done for the release, right? So if we're in a situation where there there is nothing to discuss, as long as the expectation is like you give teams lead time to say, do we think there's anything to discuss? But very, very much to the point of like at the front, at the front of the release, it's largely, the leads and enhancements running. Towards the back of the release, it's release notes, comms, docs doing their thing, right? And not to say that everyone's not doing things throughout, but those are the teams that are more heavily impacted at those points in the cycle. So it is important that they get synchronous time. But just call out the expectation, like, hey, if there is nothing to do, then leave it to the teams that either need that time to be synchronous or need the time back to make the call.
Right, yeah, early in the release, there's very, very, very little for the comms team to do. So we don't super need the synchronous time at the beginning of the release, but at the end, we very much need it.
Right. Any additional comments or questions? So I guess my takeaway is that for most teams, that synchronous time meeting times will be helpful. And if there are any situations where we don't, we can cancel the burn down meeting or do it async in Slack, or provide an update in the agenda, or the release team meeting agenda.
Yep.
Word.
Sounds good. Next one is for Mickey, who I don't think could make this call, or the comms team. Update the comms handbook about the removals blog. So midway, shortly after code freeze, we release a removals or deprecations blog on kubernetes.io. And this action item is to include more additional examples, blogs, placeholder PRs, etc. Add information about collaborating with other release leads and teams. I know we have a few sentences that we've added recently about the deprecation and removals blog, but I did not see, but I think this is still to do, that we need to add more information so that new folks in the comms team know or have some examples to go by. This is fairly new, what we releasing in a removals blog mid-cycle, but it's something that we could, I guess, template out better.
Yeah, I talked to Mickey about this. So I am working on some of these changes to the handbook, mostly around like, what do we do with this mid-cycle release blog? How does it actually fit into the schedule? What is allowed to go in it? Because this one is weird, right? It is also including major changes, not just deprecations or removals. And also around like shadow responsibilities and where resources are. There is like a lack of specific information about where people can find certain resources. That I have handled this release by giving my shadows a cheat sheet that I wrote, but I am going to open a PR to add that to the handbook.
That would be great. All right, any comments or questions for Katz? All right, next one is for Jeremy to clarify what is out of tree in our documentation. I don't think this was not done, did not see PR on this, and don't think Jeremy's on the call. So this is common because we often get these questions. We track entry enhancements that are going into the release, but sometimes we track out of tree enhancements, and sometimes there are benefits of tracking out of tree enhancements for those contributors, like being part of the release blog or having a feature blog about that enhancement. Even though it is out of tree, but they also need to comply to all of the release related milestones and deadlines as well, even though they are out of tree. So I could also help out with this, and I could open a PR in defining out of tree and have it open up to comments as well.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful here to get a better idea of exactly what we're talking about, like what the scope is. I would, one of the examples that comes to mind immediately for release engineering is a Golang update, right? So Golang update has the potential, and in fact, right now has the potential to delay the release for 119, right? The Go 119. Prior, don't know if it wasn't, I don't think it was Go 18, Go 118, but 117 maybe. Changes in Go 117 impacted latency across lots of components within clusters, right? And that's something that's like good to know in the docs, but like it's not directly a core Kubernetes change, but it's a component that has kind of a knock-on effect. So what are the scope of the things that we feel would need to be documented, right?
Thank you very much.
I think Nate wrote something on the chat. I'll just read it. Nick said, I think this came up regarding Kubernetes API stuff too, which is a separate website. So there was some confusion as to whether or not we should be tracking it.
The API reference documentation?
Yes. I guess, yes. I guess like when we talk about the out of tree stuff, it's not only like out of Kubernetes stuff, but also like because some of the documentation they refer out of tree as the out of tree repo, which is sitting in staging, but also have their own like repo sitting under Kubernetes.
Right. And I mean, there are also things like cluster autoscaler and in the past to a much larger extent than it is today, the in-tree versus out-of-tree cloud provider stuff, right?
Yeah.
My understanding is that the API stuff is auto-generated. So it is based on some in-tree components. Rather, you have to put the documentation in-tree for it to be generated, but I am not an expert there. I don't know enough about that in general. So it's something worth investigating, but I would say that any changes to have it reflected on the site would also, like, we need to make sure that it fits into any auto generation workflow. So it's not a, auto generated something and then a human changes it. And then we've got disparity between the two. Right?
Yeah, I think this action item came in for 124 because there was a lot of Docker Stream related documentation in those reference generated docs that we had to make PRs to. Like I did one for kube control, and so there's some additional things for 124 that we may not see in other releases, but we should also make note of.
Yeah, I guess if for those kind of repos, which the answer would be yes, we should track them. And for like the stuff like Stefan mentioned earlier on the Golang example, then it's out of our control, something like that, right?
Yeah, I think getting an idea of just what is potentially in control, because so that's not necessarily out of like Golang updates are not necessarily out of our control because SIG release manages those, right? If you take something like the distroless IP tables image that was introduced, which is going to be the new base for the kube proxy images, right? That's something that was built out of tree as well, but has an in-tree impact, right? So I think it's worthwhile to have a few folks brainstorm on the kind of shapes that these out of tree but in tree impacting things might be, and the checking out. If you've seen some of the conversation on the enhancements repo around what is like talking about the scope field for KEPs, some of that discussion has happened before. It would be worthwhile to revive some very specific points there to get a list together of things for the teams to consider.
Thank you very much. There's also some notes from Nate's on the chats. Also think of sites like Gateway API.6.kits.io.
That's under SIG Network's purview. It's not actually auto-generated docs. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's some docs like Cluster API has their handbook, and I think those are their scope is under that SIG or that working group. One note from Nate's not auto-generated, but we may need to keep tabs on it.
And that said, I think it would be, maybe it's useful to keep a list from the, I don't know even what perspective, this maybe contributor experience, right? Of like when there is a request for a new site to spin off of sig.k8s.io or something like that. There's a way to scrape it. I mean, we can scrape the DNS records, right? And that's simple enough, right? But so Gateway API is an example. The Cluster API stuff, as Ray mentioned. Kind is another one. We've got stuff somewhere too, I think. So yeah, so but being able to see the list of like, these are all the hits to like sigs.k8s.io or .k8s.io that we might need to look into as a quick checklist for folks could be useful.
All right, sounds good. It might just need to, it could just be a simple like request to like, please update any documentation that might be affected by any new or graduated release or enhancement in the next release. Those folks will have the expertise on what is in those sites. All right, I'm going to try to move things along faster. I'm sorry for the time. Next topic is add notes about exceptions in K-SIG release. There is a PR opened about this, has a few LGTMs. So this is a work in progress, just adding a note about the exception criteria. So please take a look at that pull request. Any comments or questions?
A quick question for me is there's confusion from the bug side is when bugs file for enhancement exception requests, what is the proper process for bugs there? Like when it comes to code freeze?
So I think an element of this is determining the impact, right? People should feel comfortable marking something as release blocking if it truly is that. I don't think it is potentially, I don't think it's truly possible to crush all the bugs, just given my time in the project. But I would hope that bugs that enter a certain release phase are hopefully discovered and addressed within that release phase. And if not for the immediate point release within that 3-week time span. But I think for the bug triage team, working with the owning group to determine the criticality and the impact, like, is this a release blocking bug, right? If so, we've got to raise the visibility, and it's got to be on the team's radar. It's got to be tracked somewhere, right? A bug is like, there's only so much we can do to crush all the bugs again. But things that feel, I think the first line is like, do we have to fix this because it is actually release blocking is the first determination.
I think there's just confusion from people working with the code that have like bugs issues as to what to do or what team to communicate it with, and the exception process is the most obvious one. So I guess my question is, should I add a note for people with bugs? Like, what team should they communicate to? And like point them where to go if it's not filing an exception request.
Yeah, but bugs should not, in my opinion, bugs should not be part of the exception request process.
Right. And I think that was the confusion last release. So should I just say, like, please talk to the bug triage team if you have a bug past code freeze?
Yeah, I think that's a good first step for sure.
All right, Any additional comments or questions? All right, next one is to for CC, which is done, add a date to the schedule for the major themes. And I did see that in the schedule, so that is done. Next one, don't know who for this action item is just follow-ups for role handbooks updates. So this is for myself and for the 124 emeritus advisor. So I did reach out to the 124 release for the role leads as well. So I'll make sure that if there's any additional updates. This is something that we should do every release, post-release, is that we should revise the handbooks as necessary, and we should always continually improve the handbooks. So I might make a note of that as well on the handbooks. All right, so that's it for the previous retro follow-up. I want to know we're kind of strapped for time here. I'm going to go through what went well. 125. Xander being able to pivot the enhancements freeze dates was good for the community, and +1 to that. Next one is enhancements freeze went well with only 1 exception request received. Last one is from CC as well. Shadow orientation went great. Thank you very much for all the shadows for attending the orientations, and also role leads and lead shadows and CC also for attending as well. What could have gone better? 125 from Jeremy. Don't see Jeremy on the participants list. Is some confusion about tabs in the enhancement sheet groups, and in the enhancement sheet and groups folks need to be in. There's a lot of permissions that are all over the place in the enhancements tracking sheet. Perhaps having a default tab with instructions instead of a dashboard would make things, user friendly. And there's a Slack conversation link here as well. Any comments or questions about this? Yeah, this might be might be an action item just to add some instructions to the enhancement tracking sheets, as we've discussed before, that we are moving towards the GitHub projects beta. But the enhancement tracking sheet will still be around for at least 1 or maybe 2 more release cycles or more, until we get the GitHub projects beta fully vetted and working.
Yeah, I think at the beginning of the enhancement, people all feel like Sigley's also confused about where to add the enhancement into the spreadsheet, and also the spreadsheet permission based on tabs also confused some of us as well. And I think Pronica already added a general instruction in the spreadsheet itself that helped a lot. Yeah, maybe it could also do the same thing in the future. But I guess by switching to the board projects, they hopefully don't need any further instructions on that.
I have to drop, but just want to say thank you, everyone, for the work that you've been doing across the cycle. And for those of you who have been here for multiple cycles, seriously, it's appreciated and needed. So thank you. Later.
Thanks, Stephen. All right, we're just going to go a few more, then we'll stop and pause until the next release retro, which is after the 125 release. There's something to highlight is that the enhancements freeze dates moving forward, there is a GitHub discussion on it. And this is the enhancements freeze date is something that we've changed multiple times. And we have some data on it as well for past releases, and we've moved it sooner, and then we have good reasons why, then we moved it later, and we have good reasons why. So it might be a Goldilocks thing of finding the right date, which is going to be impossible. We're not going to satisfy everyone on this. So please, yeah, so please add your comments to the enhancements freeze dates. So I know the release retro, we actually marked it at the end to last for 45 minutes. So I know we're over time. So I'm going to pause here actually and just leave some room for Any overall comments or questions then for this release retro? Placeholder. All right. So thank you very much for joining the first release retro of Kubernetes 1.25. We will have a second and possibly a third release retro after the 125 release on the which is targeting for August 23rd. I'm going to stop the recording now.
Thank you so much, Ray.